Okay, good morning, everybody. It's great to have everyone here with us today. This is our DAG April monthly meeting. My name is Eli Storch, and I chair the Design Advocacy Group. And we're delighted that you guys are with us, and that we're all here to talk about this fascinating project. So let me run through a few business items and advocacy items to get started, and then we'll dive into our program. One thing that we always ask is if you have anything you want to share with us, if you have events, exhibitions, advocacy work, please throw it in the chat. I'll try to call on you, and we'll highlight everything that's getting into the chat there. And throughout the program today, as you have questions for our speakers, put them in the chat. There will be a robust Q&A at the end of the program. So make sure that you're putting your questions in the chat so that we can collate them and make sure that we get them all answered. So let me jump in. I'm going to talk about a few advocacy items, some upcoming events, and what's going on in Philadelphia. So appreciating our friend Noah Zucker over at BizNow, who wrote a nice piece on our last weekend or last week's DAG event with the night mayor, Raheem Manning. It's a really nice piece, and we have posted that video up onto our website here. So on YouTube, you can always go and look up the Design Advocacy Group. You can see our sadly low number of subscribers, and that you can help us out with that by subscribing to the DAG YouTube channel. But all of our programs are posted there, so you can go watch our meetings, watch our events on there, and learn what we are up to. DAG used to be an off-the-record platform, but during COVID, when we switched to Zoom and we had a lot less control over where the feed went, we decided to go on record. So we have been recording meetings since 2020 and putting a lot of content up there. So go check those out. There's a lot of interesting stuff on there, and we thank Noah for covering that event. Another story that he posted this past week, a project that was presented 6 or so months ago at DAG, has its funding and is breaking ground up at West Park, which is exciting to see that getting underway. If you'll remember, there's a significant reworking of the streets and building new construction housing as well as renovating those towers up at 44th and Market-ish, and in that massive parcel there. So exciting to see ground broken there, and we'll follow the progress of that project and hopefully bring the team back for an update at some point. A couple of things that I touched on last week, but I'm just going to run through quickly. I think we were all kind of stunned to echo Paul Steinke's words about the overturning of the Washington Square West Historic District designation. The appeal has been processed, so that is being appealed. There are thousands of pages of documentation of evidence as to why that historic district should stand, and so hopefully that appeal will be successful and it will be reinstated with in not too long from now. In sad news, demolition-wise, William Way has made the decision that they're going to demolish their community center to build a larger building that has some housing. I know the Preservation Alliance continues to work with them to see what other solutions are possible, but that's a developing story that we're gonna keep an eye on, and if we learn anything, we'll share with the community. Market East getting retail pop-ups and murals, which is exciting as they are going to hold off on the demolitions along Market Street. That was something that we advocated for, and is pretty common sense to not have significant demolition going on during the 250th. So it's still unclear what the fate of those 10 and 1100 blocks of Market Street is. However, it is very exciting to see that they're going to be doing some programming. I know that Meantime is involved. There's a bunch happening, and it has to happen quickly because they got to get this all together. I don't know, in a month, 2 months. So a lot is going to happen, and a lot is going to happen quickly. So keep your eyes peeled for that, because it's going to be exciting as it all occurs. Another sort of developing story that we're following is this ongoing fight about tenant protections that Councilmember Nicholas O'Rourke and his team have put forward. So the landlord group in opposition is fighting back and sort of is suing the council member, saying that the bill violates state law. Um, it's an interesting one. There's a lot of back and forth here, but ultimately, the bill is about supporting tenant rights and giving tenants more access to power when they're in a bad situation. So, personally, I'm not speaking for DAG. I'm just speaking personally. I think this is a positive bill in a positive direction. There may be some details to iron out, but it is exciting to see that Councilmember O'Rourke is pushing for these sort of changes as we're dealing with so much new housing and so much rental housing. So that's what I've got on the advocacy side. In terms of upcoming events for DAG, we have yet to post it on our website. The details will go up any day now, but you can mark your calendars for May 13th. We're going to be in the new VIA space. That's the old Hamilton Hall at UArts. We're excited to host our first event there. We will print it in bold so folks don't go to the wrong venue, but that is where this event will be held. We are meeting with the team that's responsible behind some of the revitalization, pedestrian upgrades, and other general beautification and upgrades to Broad Street, specifically South Broad Street. It is a many block program, but they're beginning with one test block. Construction's underway, so we'll have the landscape architecture team, we'll have the architecture team, and then some the local representatives for the project are going to come. They're going to tell us what they're working on. They're going to tell us what they've learned so far and how they're going to expand and keep improving South Broad Street. So that's very exciting. It's in person, so you don't have to sign up, though it does help us know how many people are coming if you do sign up. So hopefully by end of this week, it'll be on our website, but we are going to send out a bunch of notifications as soon as it is available with all the details. So thank you for attending that, and we'll see you there in over a month's time. But let's get into our program today. Remember, please stay on mute throughout. It really helps our audio quality. And I'm going to hand it over to Nika Faulkner. Nika's our wonderful DAG fellow, who in her day job is a preservationist herself. So this is a topic that is near and dear to her personal, professional life. So Nika, why don't you introduce our panel and let's dive into it.
Absolutely. Well, welcome everybody. Good to see everyone here this morning. So with us today, presenting on the Cecil B. Library, we have Cierra Freeman. Cierra is the co-lead of culture and strategy for Brewerytown Sharswood Neighborhood Coalition, where she stewards the organization's vision, relational alignment, and internal ecosystem of practice. So as a founding director and current administrator with over 15 years of experience as a community education and cultural organizer, she's helped build the coalition into a resident-led, movement-grounded coalition advancing equitable physical and social infrastructure in Brewerytown, Sharswood. We also have Kate Goodman joining us. Kate is a city worker and union member of AFSCME DC47 Local 2187. She works at Cecil B. Library and has done research using online resources and also found archives related to it in the branch. So throughout her 18-year career, she's been a labor organizer and community organizer in Philadelphia and Camden. And she believes that the city workers who make our city run have to unite with the broader community of working class Philadelphians. And lastly, we have Sophia Lee. Sophia is a sustainability strategist at Jacobs, focusing on implementing LEED, WELL, and climate resilient design for life sciences. She's used her positions at AIA Philadelphia as AIA Philadelphia's board member at large and chair of AIA Philadelphia Urban Design Committee to advance urban resilience, environmental justice, and Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander representation. She co-led the Brewerytown Garden Compost team for 3 years and has frequently volunteered with the Bicycle Coalition of Philadelphia. She's also taught at Jefferson University and is excited to return to Temple as a lecturer on sustainability. So with that, please welcome our presenters and take it away.
Thank you so much, Nika. So I'm going to get us started, jump right in because we have a lot to get through. So these are us once again, and I'm going to start with the architecture side of things. I'm excited to see some SMP architects on call as well because they actually worked on this design a bit. So if I get anything wrong, let me know. Um, So let's start with the architect. Cecil B. Moore Library was designed by Wright, Andrade, and Amenta, a local architecture firm. We didn't find a ton about it, but as you can see, Clarence Andrade had a respectable career in both practice and academics. In fact, his wife, Edna Andrade, who designed and installed the mosaic mural in the entryway, is much more famous. There's a ton of information about her that we could find. She's a really important figure in the op art movement, and her works are housed in the PMA, the National Gallery of Art in DC, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Buenos Aires, and she's been featured in a lot of local commissions. So it was pretty exciting to see one of her works at this library. The library is located in Brewerytown, Sharswood. You can see it up north here, kind of close to Temple campus here. And then we've got the opening ceremony in 1962. It was renamed in honor of civil rights activist and civic leader Cecil B. Moore in 1987. And it has also been treated for asbestos, which is good to know. I was like, oh, phew. And Kate is going to talk a lot more about the library history. So moving on directly into a beautiful elevation rendering by the architects. Sorry, I'm going to get my notes together. And this is an original rendering. It features exposed steel structure, rose quartz embedded precast concrete panels and rhythmically spaced trees. And the rose quartz embedded concrete panels are actually how I originally got involved. Because Kate was wondering, like, how do we clean this? And so, as you heard from Nika's introduction, I have zero historic preservation background, so I'm actually very much a fish out of water and feeling slightly imposter syndrome at the moment. But I'm the architect they found. So um, it was really cool to like research about the concrete panels and learn a lot more about that process. But we'll talk a little bit more about the other aspects. You step inside and I just remember being like, wow, like look at this exposed steel. You don't see buildings like this very frequently. And like that was just my first impression of this library was, wow, this is really cool. As you know, even as someone who like is not in historic preservation, like I learned about this yeah, as an undergrad at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. So you can see there's this incredibly clear relationship between the facade steel. It carries straight through the interior and then also relates directly to the space frame, which I will talk a little bit further. The clarity of the design and the incredible strength of the partie diagram in this, I just can't get over it, right? Like you see the elevation. This is a partial elevation of a few bays, and then you step inside and you can see that the rhythm of it and the sizing and the proportions are exactly the same. And then I'm gonna go here, since there might be folks in the audience who don't have as much architectural language or background. You have this direct relationship between the clear story windows and the structure that then allows in this beautiful southerly light as well as northerly light. You've got the rhythm of this space frame that creates this column-free interior, which is also what like Andrew Carnegie actually was putting forth in his library principles. And that relationship, by the way, I'm going to give a shout out to architect Frank Grauman, who a lot of you know in the audience. He and I were colleagues at Bolin Sign Whiskey Jackson, and he was very kind to come out to the library and lend his eyes to myself and Kate, who were there at the time, as an architect who was going to school right around the time that this library was being constructed. So he is of this era, and he could see this building in a way that it took me a minute, but once he pointed it out, I was like, oh, obviously, yes, that is what's going on here. So yeah, just the incredible clarity of design is something that it's hard to get these days because actually, as someone in sustainability, it's terrible for sustainability because you've got the actual structural steel of the inside actually touching the outside air, which other folks in this audience who are sustainably aware is a thermal bridge. So you're literally losing a lot of energy efficiency, but and I've broken a lot of students' hearts because I'm like, actually, that might not be a great idea. But you know, when you can get it to work and when you get it to happen, it's just incredible, like just the clarity of the design. Okay, I'll stop about that. And then you can also see a very clear relationship between you know, the diagrams that you just saw and Crown Hall. Um, You can see that the space frame acts very similarly to these large beams that create this mostly column-free space at Crown Hall. So very strong mid-century modern influence there. We've got this forecourt that relates very directly to the library through these beautifully detailed brick end walls that are right at the height of the library roof. And they also really help define the space of this forecourt more so. Um, and then you also have these trees that are very rhythmically spaced along with the facade. The corner details are really important. The fact that they were like inset a little bit from the edges of the library really helps the corners finish in a way that's masterfully done. We were very impressed with this. And Kate, this is over to you. You're muted.
Sorry. All right. Yes, I'm Kate. I work at the library. And so pictured here is the mural in the entryway vestibule of the branch. When I got there, and when I started working in there, this was actually covered up by posters and carts and things like that. But you can see that according to a handwritten artist statement that we found in the branch, written by Edna Andrade herself, she very intentionally chose the colors and types of tile for this mosaic in organic colors that reference nature in order to contrast the repetitive, symmetrical modernist designs and right angle of the building. She talks about how 30,000 glass tiles were imported from Italy to construct this. And the mosaic is an integral part of the design of the building. So it's difficult to tell now because the library installed grates over the windows, which you can see in those pictures, which really hide the beauty of both the mosaic and the building itself. But there's grates, there's an opaque door, and some of the windows are dark glass instead of transparent glass. So those were installed in the 80s or 90s as a response to the panic about crime. But this mosaic is called an integration of art and science. Literally, the mosaic is supposed to demonstrate how art and science work together with the materials that the mosaic is made of and contrasting that with the design of the building.
Thank you, Kate. We've got some beautiful historic interior photos. These are from the Free Library. You can see it's like very, very actively used. And every time I've gone into this library, it's been incredibly busy. So I just remember this is again from the first time I visited this library, and there was just something so incredibly satisfying in this one-point perspective and how the bookshelves align perfectly with the columns. and the space frame above, and you have this beautiful light streaming in, and this like very lovely rug with the tables and chairs. And I mean, I'm sure a lot of the architects in the audience have designed a library in their careers, whether as a student or in real life. It's just one of those building typologies that really gets our imagination going. And I would love to sit right there all day and read a book. So I really hope that y'all can see how wonderful this space is just as a building. And next, we're going to get into the community organizing side with Kate and Sierra.
Hi again, I am Kate. I work at the library. Yeah, and a bunch of I'm going to go over the history of the library, its role in the neighborhood, its role in community organizing since the 1960s. And in order to get a lot of this information, we dug through the archives that we found in the branch, hidden in a big box. One librarian in the early 2000s did a lot of work to cohere all this information, and I will tell you a little bit about her later. But as you can see here, this is pictures of a brochure called The 1950s, A Decade of Growth. And I found it at Parkway Central. So this brochure goes over all the new libraries that were designed and built in the 1950s. So in the 1950s, the Free Library built 7 new branches, relocated 3 branches, rebuilt 4 branches, rehabilitated 9 branches, and acquired the sites for 6 new branches. So that is really significant investment in 29 out of the 54 libraries we have today. And only 1 branch, the Rittenhouse Square branch, was funded with any private money. Our branch, like all the other ones that got additional investment, were funded just by the regular capital funding program. So our branch really tells a story about when the city and our government in the United States was actually investing in public services. On the left-hand side, you can see there's actually a picture of, this is a main feature of the brochure. A welder is pictured working on the branch's steel girders because this element of the design was so significant to modernist architecture at the time. Next slide. Here is pictured the grand opening of the library. So this is April 10th. It's 1962. It's not 1963. Sorry about that error. It's April 10th, 1962. About 1,200 people attended the grand opening, and they shut down Columbia Avenue in order to host it. The mayor was there. Countless elected officials were there. Before the Columbia Avenue Cecil B. Moore branch was opened, our library was actually located in the Wagner Institute at 17th and Montgomery near Broad Street. And that branch was open all the way up until when the new branch was opened at 23rd and Cecil B. Moore. So there were no service gaps. In the lead up to 1962, I found a ton of branch annual reports going back to 1955. And the librarians writing about the branch describe both patrons and staff eagerly anticipating the branch's construction and the investment made in expanding the collection. Throughout the next several weeks after this opened, hundreds of children and adults registered for new library cards and came to take a tour of the building. Next slide. And here is just a quick quote from Dorothy Harris, one of the branch librarians. The first day of service in the new building was exhausting but very exciting. It seemed like thousands of eager children and teenagers came to register and admire the handsome new building and shining new books. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit. So in order to get a lot of information, I went down to Parkway Central Library and found we have literally volumes of the annual reports from every branch going back to 1955. And there's a ton of information in there that I was able to glean about the history of our branch and the history of the neighborhood. So actually, can you go back to the previous slide? So unlike other libraries. Our library has always been noisy. It's always been a hub of energy. It's been a forerunner for the contemporary library, which are seen today as more than just places to check out books, but are community spaces and civic hubs. So, a lot of other branches still to this day in our library system are quiet and seen as repositories for books, but our library has always been different. And still today, we have novel elements inside our branch that encourage movement and play, like the rock climbing wall. So librarians since the 50s have reported similar trends in usage that we still see today. So they report big, lively crowds of young students after school. Staff mention they're losing battles to the quote, loud talking and laughter of children, which is great, but they didn't love it all the time. They had to push for 30 more chairs so they didn't have to turn students away. Groups of 50 to 70 children came throughout the 60s and 70s to attend Vacation Reading Club in the summer. Librarians also described being a popular hangout for, quote, noisy teenagers after school, disrupting people trying to study. So, we haven't ever been a quiet branch, and that makes me really excited. Our branch has also primarily served African American patrons since the 1920s, but during the Second Great Migration between 1940 and 1960, as Black Philadelphians were pushed out of South Philadelphia due to crowding conditions and rising housing prices, more Black families moved to North Philadelphia, and librarians talk about that throughout the reports. Additionally, our branch has always served low-income people and families. In the early 60s, the average income in Sharswood was at least 30% lower than the Philadelphia average. As compared with other neighborhood libraries, our librarians reported that much larger number of patrons were unable to pay late fines. And because many community members were struggling to get stable housing and experiencing constant displacement, the branch's book stock was depleted more rapidly as patrons lost books in the shuffle. And that's also something we see today. Okay, next slide. It's really important to know, and Cierra is going to talk more about Columbia Avenue, but in the block surrounding where the library is today at 23rd and Cecil B. Moore, has always been a location where there has been learning and educational institutions. So back to 1937, at 21st and Columbia Avenue, there was a library established by the Work Progress Administration. They opened a Learning library devoted to Black literature and history, and the library was housed in the same building as the United Negro Improvement Association and staffed by workers of the WPA. In this middle article here, this is one of my favorite things, is a Black evangelist preacher in 1957 held a revival in the lot even before the library was there. So like our branch, even before the building was there was a lot of civic activity in this corridor. And then pictured on the right is John Elliott Churchville, who was a civil rights advocate and Black nationalist who was a member of SNCC and helped run freedom schools in Georgia and Mississippi. When he came back from the South, he opened the Freedom Library in a Ridge Avenue storefront. The community library served as an educational center and held 2,000 books by and about African Americans. In 1966, it was raided by the Philadelphia police and the FBI when they accused the Freedom Library of being a storehouse for arms. They obviously did not find any, but I'll talk more about that later. And next is Cierra.
Hi. So as Kate shared, Ridge Avenue, this area of the city, Sharswood, Cecil B. Moore, a rich place for lots of history. So what you're looking at here is the Checker Cafe, later renamed the Checker Club. It was a jazz venue and restaurant, and today it symbolizes the entertainment district that once populated Ridge Avenue. The building is seeking preservation, and I'll say more about that in a moment. Philadelphia Housing Authority has had an agreement to stabilize the building since 2017. The Checker Cafe, later renamed, give me a second here, sorry. We're also looking at the Pyramid Club. The Pyramid Club was also a really important part of history in Sharswood. And right now, Brewerytown Sharswood Neighborhood Coalition's Sunshine Unlimited team is working very hard to get Sharswood named a culturally historic district. So all the things that you're hearing about from Kate, the things that you can see regarding the Checker Club and the Pyramid Club, these are all things that we're working really hard towards to make sure that this history is preserved across the neighborhood. I'll turn it back over to you, Kate.
Thanks, Sierra. Okay, next slide. So in order to understand the role of the library in the 60s, it's also critical to understand the political dynamics of Sharswood at the height of the civil rights movement in the 1960s and 70s. The Columbia Avenue uprising, more commonly called a riot, happened just 2 years after the library branch opened in its new building. Although the civil rights movement was underway, by the summer of 1964, the desire for faster progress was palpable. Although a conflict with the police at 22nd and Columbia Avenue sparked the uprising, I would argue that the three-day rebellion was an expression of mass frustration with the civil rights movement trying to play by the rules. The day before the uprising, President Johnson denied all but 2 of the Black Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party delegates, led by Fannie Lou Hamer, the ability to be seated at the DNC. And a nearly all-white delegation was seated at the DNC nearby in Atlantic City. So I think a lot of people talk about the events of the uprising or riot as though it was just sparked by this one event, a conflict where the police pulled over a pregnant woman at 22nd and 22nd and Columbia Avenue. But this was part of a much bigger, broader social movement than that happened. And the DNC was in Atlantic City. So I think that's also very important. It was nearby. Let's see. So after the uprising, I found a really interesting quote in the annual reports from librarian Eileen Whitney in the 1964 annual report. She says, a choice had to be made, either make the library an effective, integral part of the community by fulfilling wants and needs, or remain complacent and become another misunderstood, unused city agency. The staff chose the former. So the reports go really in depth into what library staff, and I'm sure imperfectly, I think it's important to recognize that librarianship is a historically white profession. It still is very largely white. And so, you know, this is their recounting of events. So after the riots, a staff person was designated specifically to do community outreach. Staff went out to community organizations to make sure residents were aware of services the library offered, but the branch also hosted many large meetings with neighborhood block organizations and community organizations, some exceeding 100 attendees. Early in September, I mentioned the Freedom Library before on Ridge Avenue. So Branch invited the staff of that library in to see if areas of cooperation could be worked out. The branch also provided books for 2 exhibits for their opening night, and the Freedom Library also hosted programming at our branch using the lecture room for a weekly film series. Permanent art displays. Next slide, please. Permanent art displays featuring books by and about African Americans were installed in both the adult and young adult areas. And you can see here, so there is, I'm not sure who that is, if it's a librarian or a community member, but that was in the picture on the bottom right was in the archives, and you can see people going out and actually reading to kids in the community. So not just expecting people to come in, but going out to the community. And then in the flyer in the upper right, you can see there was in November 27th, on November 27th in 1964. So like in the wake of all of this kind of political unrest and in a controversial time, the branch went right through and continued to hold programming and be a really critical civic space in the community, even working with really controversial organizations that would later be targeted by the police and the FBI. Next slide. Let's see, here's some examples of library programming. The library was the site of Operation Alphabet. That was in 1968, which was a popular groundbreaking public literacy initiative. It was free courses for any adult reading below a 6th grade level who wished to get their GED. In 1966, Spencer G. Shaw spoke at the library. Mr. Shaw was a Black American librarian, storyteller, and educator specializing in children's services. In the early 1970s, there was a program called Soul Readers that invited children to sign up to read books at local elementary schools. And the newspapers show like a really dramatic expansion of that project from like 40 children in I think the late 60s to something like 409 members later on. Next. Okay, also, this is one of my favorite facts is that Sesame Street magazine was debuted at Cecil B. Moore Library. So the year after Sesame Street debuted on TV, they released a magazine that was supposed to go along with the television show. Like caregivers would go through it with their children. And so, you know, at the time, Sesame Street, it still is like a national television program that highlighted urban community education, diverse communities. And so our branch was chosen because it was a national model for community education in a multicultural urban neighborhood. So, you know, I really think that choosing our library out of every library to debut this magazine speaks to how important our library was at the time. Next slide. I think the last slide. So I wanted to pay homage to Audrey Roll. She was the librarian at Cecil B. Moore Library in the early 2000s. She compiled a ton of all the research that we've been able to access. She put together photos, collected newspaper articles, collected commendations from city council. If we hadn't found this box, we would not have known any of this stuff. There's some more stuff that more resources I've been able to find that were not at Cecil B. Moore Library, but we never would have gone on this limb of investigation without the work that she did. A lot of the community art, all the community art in the branch right now is from work that she did in the early 2000s. And as I mentioned before, librarianship is still very white, but in the early 2000s, the late 90s, it was even whiter. So it's really important that she was at Cecil B. Moore, being a Black librarian, a Black storyteller at that time. And she was also an early member of the organization Keepers of the Culture, which still exists today. And then on the right, you can see in the early 2000s, local musicians and cultural performers such as Warren Ore, Juju, and the Women's Chakare Ensemble perform at Cecil B. Moore Library in the early 2000s. And that is my kind of historical sum up, and I'll toss it over to Cierra.
Okay. So the library fight, the campaign, the Save the Cecil B. Moore Library campaign has gone through a few iterations. We're in I'd call it the third right now. So just to walk you through the history of it a bit, right? The library showed some HVAC issues starting back in 2018. Rebuild started a city-run program based on soda tax, and the rebuild project for the Cecil B. Moore Library only covered the HVAC system and some electrical work. Once rebuild started to come out to the branch in 2022, it became clear that there was no want to, or even reaching out to the local neighborhood and neighbors to talk about what the plan for this library would be. Brewerytown Sharswood Neighborhood Coalition, that's the organization that I'm with, we became more involved with this organizing effort, and the not named here, the Cecil B. Moore Philadelphia Freedom Fighters and the Friends of Cecil B. Moore Library. With some advocacy, we were able to secure an additional $2 million towards the renovations of the library. There was also a couple of sisters who donated to the library as well. And through the advocacy of communicating back and forth with Rebuild, we were one of the only neighborhoods to get a series of meetings and be more at the decision-making table when it came to deciding what the library would look like and what other components should be added to the library. We were able to win, I'm going to call it a win, getting the ADA accessible elevator added to the plan. It had not previously been added to the plan, right? So in 2023, we had a pretty small town hall at the library, but we did have Senator Street, Councilman Isaiah Thomas, and before he was elected, our Councilman Jeffrey Young Jr. Attended the panel, some of which said that they would double the funding to the library. So with that town hall and the culmination of the work that we've done with Rebuild, we had a panel for the neighborhood showing the work that was to come. We were almost to bid, and then there was a mayoral change and a council person election. Next slide, please. All right, so now we're at phase 2. We have our new councilman, Councilman Jeffrey Young Jr., and since he came into office, he has definitely done the work of advocating for an additional $5 million for the library, and his want was more geared towards building housing above the library. Neighbors were not interested in that and did not want that. We had a town hall that had almost 400 neighbors there with the councilman, with Senator Street, with Rep. Harris, being very clear that they did not want housing above the library. So we were able to win no housing above the library. In addition to that, and some meetings following, we were able to get on record the councilman saying that the building also would not be demolished. So those are two pretty big wins that we were able to secure. The HVAC system still wasn't working the way that it should. You may have seen this for the Cecil B. Moore Library and other libraries across the city, that there has been major HVAC issues. So with the councilman agreeing not to demolish the building, not to build housing, we were still at this stale award space of the renovation not happening. Next slide, please. And so we continue to push. You know, the HVAC is functioning, but barely. And now the councilman is pushing to have this building remain as a public space, is what he's saying, but to move the actual library to 19th and Cecil B. Moore out of our very under-resourced Sharswood neighborhood into North Central that may serve a different plan that is still developing, that has more to do with housing and the changing of the neighborhood. Next slide, please. All right, so this is one of my favorite quotes from Bell Hooks. It's no accident that this home place is always subject to violation and destruction. For when the people no longer have the space to construct home place, we cannot build a meaningful community of resistance. We all know Dr. King started the understanding of beloved community. Bell Hooks took a lot of time to expand on that, wrote a number of books about it, and is my go-to person for thinking about how to be in community with others and serve our community properly. So thought it was important to add this quote. Next slide, please. All right, so we are here now at 548 days since the library was slated to begin renovation, right? We do not want the library to move to 19th and Cecil B. Moore, pushing it out of the neighborhood. We want this library to remain where it is, and there is the opportunity potentially for this library to be expanded on above or out to the forecourt, but we don't know that yet. And we do need help and support around figuring that out. So if there's anyone here that can help us with that, with the study for the expansion of the library, that would be great. We also are very interested in you all making your voices heard as much as you feel comfortable, to see that the individuals, the powers that be, that is the president of the Free Library of Philadelphia, Kelly Richards, our councilman, Jeffrey Young Jr., and our mayor understand that we are really looking for the advance of the renovation process. We raised the funding from 1.2 to 10, from 1.3 to 10.2 million dollars, and we'd like for that money to go towards completely renovating this library. Go on record beyond what he's already done in an informal kind of community meeting, saying that there won't be a demolition of the building. So that hasn't really been done yet. And approve a satellite site for the current library so that there is no interruption in services. Definitely ensure transparency and communication with us, building out a full project timeline with neighbors, with the advocates, and co-maintain an open and collaborative digital dashboard so that neighbors that aren't actively involved can see where the renovation is in the process of everything. And co-create a community advisory committee where we establish clear guidelines, make sure that this is neighbor-led as much as possible, ensure long-term accountability from the city, and with community representation, and secure additional funding. We've raised a lot of money, but this library could still use more, right? And we want to make sure that any town halls or any meetings, they're co-convened in the spirit of making sure that this is equitable decision-making happening, and continue to keep the conversation very broad. Thank you all for coming here today. We would definitely like the councilman to continue to include the FLP President Kelly Richards, but also include our councilperson Anthony Phillips in these decision-making processes as he's over parks and recreation centers, and really expand the rebuild program transparency across the city of Philadelphia is really what we're looking forward to. So these are our demands. I will drop them in the chat, and on the next page, you will see the next slide, you'll see how to contact these individuals, right? Okay, I'm going to drop these into the chat. Next slide, please. All right. And I'm not, Sophia, Kate, please come off mute too, so that we all can say thank you all for coming out.
Everybody.
Thank you all very much for being here. Looks like we had a couple questions in the chat, but I had one that I was just thinking about, so maybe we can kick off with that. So on the preservation side of things, I've worked on a handful of library buildings, but most of those were developed in the early 19th century when the free library system was just beginning to be embraced. And at that time, public education wasn't necessarily a given depending on the community. So that kind of became their primary focus. But it seems like the Cecil B. Moore Library undoubtedly embraced that effort, but also expanded its purpose to support the community in other ways. So I'm curious if you attribute that purely to the political and social climate at the time, plus the geographic and demographic conditions of the neighborhood, and how you think that the library's function in the community has evolved over the years.
And Kate, that might be for you, since
Interestingly, in some of the research, when we've been trying to find out more about C. Preston Andrade, the architect, he hasn't written a lot that's still published or that's available, but one thing I did find was that he's written several books about city planning and development in India after the end of colonization. And so I do think that, it was the broader historical climate and the demographics and the political situation in the neighborhood in the United States. But I also think that he as an architect was chosen for a reason. Edna Andrade was also very involved in activism. And so I do think that our branch in particular was designed to be kind of like a place of popular education. But I mean, it's a building, right? And what happens in the building depends on what's happening in the neighborhood. And so I think like the kind of political organizing and community education that was happening in the neighborhood found a place to do it in the public library. And because it's not a private institution, it has endured for this long because it's funded by the government, which is permanent. It doesn't have turnover every 2 years and that volatility. So having a building that is designed to be inviting, that is a permanent fixture in the community, allows people who live and work in the community to actually do community work in a continuing space. And so I don't know, that's maybe a winding answer, but it's kind of all three of those.
It brings up some interesting points, though. Like it's not just the community, but also the design of the building too, and the architect's perspective, right? So, yeah, that's very interesting. So we also had a question about the proximity of Temple University and if there is any impact to the plan for the library or just its impact on the area. Their question specifically was, what role, if any, does Temple play or potentially play in the area? So I don't know if you have anything to say about that, but. Or maybe
Well,
has Temple changed your neighborhood in general and who you're serving? Like, do you find that it's more community members or Temple students or?
Dear, do you
So,
want to talk about that? Because I totally can,
yeah.
but you have first crack at it.
I'm sorry, I'm typing the demands in the chat. What was the question?
The
Basically,
question the
sorry,
question was about Temple University and its proximity to the
go.
neighborhood. So, what role does Temple play or potentially play in the area?
Hmm.
And yeah, I kind of followed up with has like, do you find Temple students to be occupying and utilizing the space, or is it primarily a community space? Kind of like, what's the impact?
Yeah, I would definitely say that Kate can answer the question of do Temple students come to the library and use the library? I can say that we are right now at BSNC uh, paying close attention to the fact that John Fry, who was president at Drexel and then president at University City and is now here at Temple University, is here in our neighborhood, and we've seen some of the things that have changed around Drexel University while he was president, around University City and what that area has become while he was president. And it's very important for us to know that generational neighbors are able to remain in the neighborhood, you know, inviting and accepting neighbors who have migrated here, either by way of education or just because Philadelphia is a cool city and they moved here. But we want to make sure, as much as we possibly can, that any plans that are created still has, you know, generational neighbors and those who have been here for a very long time at the forefront. Um, I can't quite say yet, but what I do know is that moving the library from where it is right now to 19th and Cecil B. Moore, as proposed by the councilman, uh, positions the library in a place that takes it away from the numerous housing projects that are here in the neighborhood and the schools. It puts them further away from the amount of schools and the development and the homes that are here and the neighbors who need it. 19th and Cecil B. Moore doesn't seem like a very far, you know, way away from where the library is now, but that could be a huge difference for, you know, those neighbors who are disabled or those neighbors who are displaced or those neighbors who, you know, for whatever reasons, you know, can't make it down there and can't make it there on a consistent basis when the library is just a few blocks from them right now. Um, we're not quite sure what the full want is for moving the library to 19th and Cecil B. Moore, but we do know that it makes more sense for it to remain in the space where it is now. So hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, and I think that kind of answers the next question that popped up here from Amelia Crotty, um, who was asking about the motivation, Councilman Young's motivation for that. And she also followed up with a question about what the plan for the current building would be.
From the councilman, he said that it would remain, this is almost a direct quote, it would remain an available community space, but there was not much more said than that.
And I can't say that there have been many libraries that have been moved out of their original buildings to new buildings. The George Institute, Widener Library, the branch that's now Queen Memorial, all of the buildings that those have been moved out of are now vacant and dilapidated. So there is no model for creating some new type of public space where a library is. I don't know what kind of community space that would be other than a library. So I think, oh, and to answer the question, who uses our library now?
Mm-hmm.
I would say 90% long-term residents of the neighborhood and their children. There's also a women and families shelter. There's all kinds of public housing projects and how like institutions that serve people who are most in need of them. That is who we see. We also see elderly people, people with physical and intellectual disabilities, children who come from literally the area immediately surrounding the library. And so it is impossible for me to imagine that the same people could access the library if it was at 19th Street. And so, who is the library for? Right now, the library is, even if, the powers that be don't want resources for this neighborhood, like that's what we are, because those are the people immediately surrounding us. If you move it closer to Broad Street, you're moving it closer to Temple, closer to a lot of, like people with higher incomes, yada, yada, yada. But it's like basically Sharswood is not on the Broad Street line. So there's obviously buses and things that connect everybody, but the majority of the people who use our library walk there.
Interesting. Amelia followed up and said exactly, absolutely, and I totally agree. And then also asked with what funding to renovate the program of the current space, since it would need work no matter what. So, yeah, do you happen to have any ideas as far as, the preservation of the library and how, like, and granted, I've helped a little bit on that. I know that Sophia is helping out with some stuff. But the plan for funding, if this is to be preserved, which we hope it will be, have you looked into any other funding sources for planning that?
For plan, if the library moves, for preserving the existing space?
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, no, I think it would
It's a
be
backup plan, I'm sure, but
yeah,
yeah.
the if the library moves to a different place, I just think that's such a catastrophic idea,
Mm-hmm.
especially because people in the neighborhood, it's not only having the library right there, but it is people's lived memories in that building, in that neighborhood. When people come in, they say, I remember when I was a kid here. Or there's a mural on the wall of uh, children who were here in the early 2000s, and those children now bring their kids in. So,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
there is not even, if you were to build a new library, even like, and more so one with housing on top, we think that would cost like 20-25 million dollars. The amount of funding that's there right now, for sure, is $10 million, which is more than enough to do a full renovation that preserves the character of the existing structure. But
Mm-hmm.
there's not enough money right now to build a new library. And if in addition to that, there's a mystery pot of money that we also need to get to preserve a building to become a new kind of community space that we've never heard about before, that's not there.
Sure.
Personally, I'm not going to do the research to find it for somebody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We had an architecture student, Caitlin Quigley. She asked if there are any local groups, and maybe this is a question for Sophia, like local or national firms that focus primarily on library design. I wish I could answer that question myself, but I'm not sure I can.
I wish I could answer that question. As I mentioned earlier, am in a very different space for architecture. It's so funny because a lot of like friends or neighbors will be like, "Hey, I'm working on a kitchen. Can you help?" And I'll be like, "No." Like personal, like small Philadelphia row homes are like mysteries to me. We do have SMP architects on the call. And SMP actually helped work on a design for the rebuild project for this library. Actually, you can find those drawings online. So SMP Architects certainly works on libraries. And yeah, it's also really funny to like talk about moving the library closer to Temple because Temple literally just built a shining, beautiful new library by Snow Hetta. I'm like, they have a Snow Hetta library. Like, it just seems unnecessary to put another library near them. Yeah, I would recommend, looking at architect websites and, seeing their portfolio of work and see what they've worked on because then you get to know the architecture firm a little bit better and their work. But I mean, that's probably where you're going to find out like who works on libraries in this city.
Great. And Sierra seems to think we're already looking into that, so that's fantastic. We had another question about any community meetings for, like, will there be another meeting held for input from community stakeholders in the future?
Yes, and stay tuned. If you email, say the Cecil B. Moore Library at gmail.com, we will definitely keep you up to date on upcoming meetings.
Fantastic. And I've discussed this with you guys a little bit, but Leslie asks, will getting a historic preservation designation affect the potential renovation plans for the building? So maybe we can speak a little to the renovation plans, and I'm happy to add any commentary as far as designation if that's helpful.
Yeah, one thing so the historic preservation nomination really was the only intent of it was to stop like the demolition and taking away the resource, right? Like the only purpose of the nomination was to help the neighborhood keep the library. And so if it is going to hinder any sort of whatever, then we certainly don't have to go through with it. But there is also a desire to expand the library, which, yeah, we mentioned it to you, Nika. Perhaps there's a way to expand the library that is sensitive to the historic aspects of the building and can still get the nomination. But, it could impact the historic preservation nomination, or the nomination could impact the expansion. It's something that we are still working on understanding the full extent of because I'm not a historic preservationist.
Sure, and maybe I can speak to that a little bit, but there's a few different types of nominations that would prevent demolition, whether that is at the local level, at the city level, or at the federal level or state. And I will say, just working as a consultant in the field on adaptive reuse projects, additions are not an uncommon thing that we see. So it would be impacted undoubtedly just because you would have to follow the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation and go through the process of design review from government officials, but it's absolutely not impossible. It just means it's a more collaborative process between the architect, the developer, the community, and yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I see Todd's comment. Again, Todd worked on the original plan. When the original plan was done, that community members and staff worked with SMP on, the budget was about $5 million. And since then, there has been another $10 million allocated to it. And it's never been clear to us, or the conversation has never been open to staff and community members about how to use that additional money. Is that money enough to build some kind of addition? Or is it just enough to build in a commercial kitchen and a new circulation desk and all the things that were cut out of the original plan due to budget constraints. But essentially, what we're asking for is enough transparency and input into the design and access to the full amount of money that's currently allocated to the library. Because the way the program is being run now is that the old design is taken off the table, but there has been no new design or new study that we have access to or new assessment that we have access to that talks about what plans the city and the council person are looking at now.
Great. I think that covers all of the final questions that have been put into the chat, unless anybody else has some final thoughts. But otherwise, thank you all so much for being here and for speaking on this. It seems like an extremely important community resource that really needs some focus and some love. And I don't think that that neighborhood has gotten enough, it sounds like. So we can't be taking away one of the biggest resources, right?
Exactly.
Sure. And then you'll see also that the Save the Cecil B. Moore Library Gmail was dropped into the chat, as well as Councilman Young's contact info. So if you're interested in reaching out to either of those, please do.
So as we wrap up here, please turn on your cameras. When we're virtual like this, it's a chance to give our round of applause on our various cameras. So throw your camera on. Thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you write down all of these contact informations and stay involved, because it is an important and very necessary fight to be having, and so much wonderful information today. So thank you all for coming, and this is really great stuff.
And one more thing that I forgot to mention was that we are looking to put together a letter of support from the design and architectural advocacy community, because there's been a lot of messaging from staff in the community about how important it is as a community space, but we're also trying to raise awareness of how it's an important historical space and architectural design space. So if you or your organization is interested in being part of signing a letter to send to stakeholders, you can also email the same email address, save the Cecil B. Moore Library at gmail.com.
And when that's ready, please make sure you get it to us, and we will share with folks as well.
Okay, great.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much,
Thank you all.
everyone. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.